Hey guys, so I just recently saw the trailer for Beetlejuice, and seeing Jenna Ortega in it reminded me of X, which came out in 2022. I rewatched it, and it reminded me so much of how much I loved this movie. So today, that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about. X is, at the surface level, coded as a basic slasher. Hell, it's derived from a lot of our favorite classics, most notably Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which in and of itself might deter people from liking this film, simply by saying it's nothing new, just some hot young cast getting slaughtered in a rural farm. And yeah, not denying anyone's point of view on that, but I just don't see it that way. Many variants are altered in the structure of the film to better suit the experience and the theme of the film. See, Ty West, the director of this film, saw these staples of slashers and, in my opinion, recontextualized them to make better use of the themes and tropes of the movie. For starters, the villains in this film are arguably some of the most vulnerable and flimsy villains in pretty much all of horror history, to the point that they get this like layer of disguise from the aforementioned cast of meatbags because of how inconspicuous they are. In most horror movies, the villains are given enough resources or overbearing power to convince the audience that they are more powerful than the remaining protagonists that are left to survive. However, in this story, they are vividly shown to be weak and unthreatening, because the point of this movie isn't to show you this hulking monster that's meant to mow down everything in its path. Instead, the movie knocks down the power of the villains to talk about sadness, age, sex, envy, all in clever and nuanced ways. So, a general idea of this movie is it's based in 1979 in Texas, where a group of people rent out an Airbnb to shoot a porn, and then bloodshed ensues. And that's fine if that's the only thing you get out of it. The movie's still enjoyable that way, but I just don't see it that way. Like I said, I like much more the themes at play, to the point that I find the real horror to be in that, where it's in particular age, envy, and regret. Like I said before, the movie does a really great job at touching the fear of age. For example, the protagonists are constantly throwing jabs at Pearl and Howard's sex life, Pearl and Howard being the ones that are renting their Airbnb to them. Honestly, even the camera shows us how their sex life is affected by their age, with us being shown of scenes how Pearl is trying to seduce her husband and him basically saying that he can't have sex because it'll give him a heart attack. It really does touch on our internal fear of growing old and feeling unattractive. Yet, I love the representation of Pearl versus Howard, as their different points of views constantly conflict, with Pearl's point of view constantly showing us that she is trying to seduce her husband, because to her, growing old doesn't automatically mean you don't want sex or you don't feel attraction. Even the constant mirroring between Pearl and Maxine, as they are arguably the same character, just at different points in life. One who is ready to take on the world, and the other who the world is all but done with. And to be honest, in many ways, I found it deeply sad and powerful. And while that subject matter is pretty dark, it's not to say this movie isn't fun. The movie's fun as hell. The kills are great, the characters are likable, which in a slasher is very refreshing. In particular, Mia Goth and Brittany Snow are amazing. Mia Goth playing both Pearl and Maxine, and while still being able to create a specific identity for each, it's just fantastic. Kid Cudi's character, Jackson, who is so nice and thoughtful, in a normal slasher film, this character would have been so forgettable, but he makes it his own and adds to the character to make it somebody that you're actually rooting for throughout the story. He does such a fantastic job at humanizing Jackson, to the point that when most of these characters die, because of course it's a slasher, they're gonna die, you actually feel bad and you want them to actually survive or find a way out of this. The same goes for Brittany Snow's Bobby Lynn. She's funny, witty, and a character like this is usually annoying, but that's not the case here. Self-centered is usually a trait of sets of characters like these, but we're constantly shown the opposite, that these characters have a sense of altruism. And in fact, later in the movie, Bobby Lynn and Jackson are both killed because of their niceties. There's also this recurring X Factor reference throughout the film, and I love the double meaning behind it, because obviously the first one is that it's X rating because it's a porn movie that they're shooting, but also the X Factor of when a movie star is born, when you see that person that gets like explodes out of just from one role or something like that, and they become this like megastar after that. Like that's what they're kind of touching on with this. Also, one of my favorite lines, which is kind of one of the thesis of the film is when RJ says it's possible to make a good dirty movie. Again, one of those meta statements where in context it's talking about making a good porn movie, but to the real world it's also talking about the bad stigma that horror in general has, that most people write off horror as being cliches, but he's saying it's possible to make a good horror movie, which is exactly what Ty West does here. Just in general, the movie shot very well. Most of the characters are well written, if not with the exemption of Lorraine and RJ in my opinion. I wish their characters were a little bit more fleshed out, especially in the beginning. In the second half, there's more to them, but I feel like the first half they're kind of just absent. Some of the best parts of this film are the interactions of Pearl and Howard with the rest of the cast. There's this sense of envy from Pearl when it comes to Maxine, as she kind of idolizes Maxine's physical body, but also her representation in the world and her potential. Especially when you understand that Maxine is constantly saying how she wants to be this superstar, she wants to be like known by everybody. Again, leading more into how Pearl always thought that she had this potential as well, even when she has this moment with RJ when he's trying to leave and she says, I can show you the potential that I have. It kind of goes to show that Pearl hasn't let go of that dream, and she sees a lot of that in Maxine, except that Maxine still has that future ahead of her. In retrospect, when first watching this film, it was cool to hear about the lore behind Pearl's past, and it made me very invested in wanting to know more about it, especially knowing that this was being shot at the same time as the prequel, so it made me that much more interested to see what happens in the next movie. Like I said before, I wish Lorraine and RJ were a little more fleshed out and better written. There's the other thesis statement of the movie in like the middle chunk of the movie where everybody's in the barn having like a campfire song, which kind of reminded me a little bit of Friday the 13th Part 1, where they're just like singing around each other and like kind of doing their own thing. It was a neat touch, but basically at one point Bobby Lynn says, one day we're gonna be too old to fuck. So by this point, both Lorraine and RJ, who have had barely any dialogue, show how bad their relationship actually is. The immediate example of this is how they're the only couple that's not sitting right next to each other. There's also no hint of affection between them. In fact, there's this sense of bitterness anytime they interact with each other, and basically this whole scene shines light on RJ's facade of thinking he's creating cinema here, when in fact he wouldn't have had an issue with Lorraine being in the movie if he actually believed that. But also it is a good moment for Lorraine, as like the other girls, she wants that X factor as well. She's even talking here about how she doesn't want to be the one helping behind the scenes, she wants to be in the movie. And since like in the moment she felt like she saw the opportunity, she took it. But yeah, these are just some of the things that I really love about this movie that doesn't really have anything to do with the horror aspect of it, but at the end of the day it is a horror movie, so the third act really pays off in really good ways. There's enough gore, suspense, and kills to satisfy, and the climax, which was extremely engaging and basically showing how Maxine's current potential bested Pearl's lingering dream, which she fixated on too hard in the end. So yeah, overall, all-star performances from everybody. There's a reason why A24 has the status it has among horror fans. I just love the fact that horror can be used as an outlet to talk about other subject matter, not just grief and generational trauma. In this particular case, Ty West and his creative team did a fantastic job. And so yeah, those are just some of my thoughts on the film. Great experience, and my name's Anthony, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.